Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Nëïgsëndöïg Cöcülës show. My name is Nëïgsëndöïg Cöcülës, the namesake for this here podcast. I am back to using free and open source software plugins. I was using proprietary plugins for an experiment for a few episodes, but I've gone back to FOSS plugins, specifically LSP, DBAS, and noise repellent. Today's discussion, however, will be Linux distributions. Now, I have been using Linux for 5.5 years or so. I've used distributions based upon the three major distros, Debian, Arch, and Red Hat. I am a user of keyboard-driven desktop environments. We call these window managers, or shorthand WMs, for around 2 years or so, maybe 3. I am a free software enthusiast, and you may want to look up the free software philosophy, of which I follow to about 90 to 96% of the time. I've been doing this with a local first setup, specifically for content creation, as I talked about in episode 17, professionally for 4 years. Most Windows users will want out of that ecosystem. Oh, and if you're considering an Apple device, don't get one. It's least surveillance. But if you decide to get one, know that you'll be slightly better off in terms of privacy and security than with Windows. But don't get an Apple machine. It's just a no-go. That's what doesn't make me an expert. But at the very least, I may be a good starting point for many going on their privacy journey. Now, if you are a first-time user, you know nothing about GNU Linux operating systems, your best bet is my recommendation of Linux Mint, of which I've used for the longest time, though that might actually be beaten by CachyOS. Now, what is Linux Mint? This is an Ubuntu and Debian-based distribution that does not implement Snap by default. Unless you want containerized command line interface applications, you do not want Snap. If you want containerized or sandboxed GUI applications, your best bet is to use Flatpak, but that also has security holes. Most things are easily accessible out of the box, and it's such an easy distribution to set up. I have multiple Mint tutorials on Cöcülës Nation, my main channel, where I basically recommend starting. I have the 21.3 tutorial being linked, as well as, the 21 tutorial, the most popular of them of all time. Apparently, my 21 tutorial is really, really good. But I made some changes with, I think, LMDE 6, and then some more changes with the 21.3 tutorials. Anyway, this will be mostly GUI driven with the Cinnamon desktop environment. Think a Windows Vista or Windows 7 style desktop environment. That's basically what it is. Now, if you want to do KDE, for example, KDE that isn't Wayland only, rather, then you're free to do whatever you want with Mint. If you want to do KDE, that's fine. They did, however, do a KDE Plasma version. However, that's no longer the case. You've got Mate, which is not the flagship. Cinnamon is the flagship, but also XFCE, which is pretty nice. Anyway, Mint is an all-around general-purpose OS designed for beginners. It is customizable out the wazoo if you know what you're doing. Now, I did make a video on Cöcülës Nation, linked below, with i3 on Mint using Bumblebee status. And it handled i3 pretty darn well. Of course, I had BSPWM too. Now, you have your own packages for Mint on APT because no Snap support. And it's really, really disgusting when you encrapify Ubuntu. Encrapifying Ubuntu is not really a good idea. Yeah, I just so happen to be a neckbeard, if you can't tell. And it can be turned on for those who wear suits, though. The cons of this are that you have a package based using older versions of software, though I'm not sure about Mint if they have up to date versions. Snap is basically shoved down from Ubuntu upstream, but you can disable that, or it's already disabled on Mint and Pop! OS, which is another recommendation. These are protest distros. If you do not like X11 or X Libre for some stupid reason, I think it's pretty silly. We are all silly at times. You can have Cinnamon with Wayland support, which is in the works. I am going to point out my hatred at how Wayland is governed, especially with the big desktop environment or DEs, Plasma, GNOME, and Budgie, always having preferential treatment. This is complete bullspit, especially with GNOME, IBM, who owns Red Hat, and Free Desktop being the ones who are very, very dirty about how they shove Wayland down everyone's throats. I get what Wayland tries to do. How about you do better, Wayland devs, and not shove it down our throats? Make it optional, and you should be okay with me attempting it. To be fair, I was going to be attempting maybe using Miracle WM, which is based upon Mir, which is pretty nice, but apparently it's gone to complete trash, I heard. I'm not entirely sure. But Wayland, nah. It also introduces unnecessary fragmentation. While I am all for it in quite a few cases, this was astroturfed. Wayland adoption was absolutely astroturfed by these former X11 devs. How about you just do something about this whole security stuff? Maybe you might want to fix a vulnerability which allows you to get keylogged. Honestly, at this point, if you really want to shove Wayland down our throats, how about we actually use Wayland vulnerabilities against you so you can actually fix them? Now, I get it. I get some of the issues, but that is just a cover. I have a video on this linked below on why I will use X11 and X Libre instead of Wayland. I am, however, willing to try Phoenix though once it becomes a thing. Because, yeah, Phoenix, it's going to be pretty good. Anyway, moving on. Before I get into more of a tangent on how Wayland kind of sucks. Most of the software can be hard to build from source. That's why you have Paxstall and PPAs making things easier. Oh, and if you are on Debian, there's apparently this PPA thing that you can do. It's weird, but apparently that's how it works. I will give Mint a score of 7 out of 10 due to its ease of use for beginners, easy setup when a tutorial like mine is followed, and the overall user experience and user interface being pretty much straightforward, self-explanatory in most cases. I personally like using the terminal, but that's just personally me. My preferences may be good for you, your preferences are good for you, it doesn't matter. As long as we have the love for Linux, that's all we can talk about. Sure, there are going to be some disagreements on like X Libre or X11, Wayland, and all of these things regarding Wayland. Let's just move on. Now, let's get into the gamers, because we got some gaming-based distributions. Now, I'm all for distributions that allow you to really mess up your machine and learn how to fix it. That is where Pop! OS, Nubara Project, and CachyOS come into play. That is in Ubuntu, Red Hat, and Archbase, relatively speaking, respectively. Why am I? It's nighttime over here where I'm recording, so do keep that in mind. Pop! OS, let's do this one first. It is Ubuntu based, focused on gaming, science, and AI. It'll be mostly the same with Mint. This will come with a desktop called Cosmic. It is Wayland only, which is bullspit! Anyway, I would recommend Ex Libre support, but you can actually get Ex Libre just fine if you do something like Cinnamon or Trinity. I've used Trinity, I don't really like it though. I've heard Sonic desktop environment is pretty good. SDE, I do need to try that sometime soon, but I'm not entirely sure about it. Anyway, if there's an Ex Libre version of Cosmic, I would love to try that. I wonder if there's a fork of Cosmic, because I'm sure the source code is out there. I really do want an Ex Libre version of Cosmic, because that would be pretty sweet. But that's just my preference. That's why I'm not going to be using Pop right now. Anyway, the cons are really going to be the same as Mint. There is no support indicated for X Libre. X11 is just dead in the water for now. Hey, System 76. You can thank IBM GNOME and Free Desktop for using their dirty tactics in shoving Wayland down our throats instead of supporting X Libre, which is an actively maintained X server fork. I will continue to proclaim my distaste for Wayland. It does good on some fronts, I will admit, but I am not really willing to be all in on Wayland. Next, Nubara project. This is also a Wayland-centric fork of Fedora, which is Red Hat, so it's IBM. But it is a fork of the IBM source code. It's official as KDE as of right now. I really do want X Libre or X11. Likely gonna need to install something with X support though. But despite that, this is content creation oriented, created by Thomas Kreider, who is a Red Hat engineer. He also goes by the name Glorious Egg Roll. The egg roll strikes again! Anyway, the software is usually newer for this distribution, but it's not bleeding edge. It's what we call a semi-rolling release. It's not like the latest and greatest version, but it's also the latest stable version of a piece of software. It is apparently good for older hardware, despite maybe some setbacks I could personally see. And as an example, actually, in the undisclosed location, we set up Fedora on the machine of one of my older folks, and he has some pretty old hardware. Apparently, KDE Wayland works extremely fine with Fedora. Interesting. But now we get into the Arch-based Kashi OS. This is an Arch-based distribution focused on content creation, of which I happen to be using at this very moment to record this episode. I've been on Kashi for quite a few months now. It's great. This is a full-on rolling release. This is a top-notch, bleeding-edge release in terms of the software that is used, specifically Pacman and the Arch user repository. Ooh, boy, is it good. It is highly customizable, especially with a ton of guides on their wiki for their stuff. You have a choice of window managers and desktop environments. KDE is the default, so keep this in mind. Both X11 and Wayland are supported with choices like i3, BSPWM, Cinnamon, Hyperland, although that's actually Wayland, all that stuff. I personally use i3 with X Libre, Polybar, and FastCompMGR, a fork of an older version of PyCon, because it causes graphical issues for me. You automatically get AUR support not through Yay. You get it through Paru. But anyway, you have this distribution, which is Arch, but made faster, more efficient, and much better performing. The kernel is also fantastic. I'm just using the standard CashOS kernel, and as of right now, I am using version 6.18.5-2. So we do have that too. Now, if you really want to set stuff up yourself, you're going to want to use Arch Linux. The honorable mention will go to Gentoo. I know of someone who happens to use Gentoo. It is actually pretty insane. Anyway, Arch is, well, a rolling release. It's a straight up rolling release that's bleeding edge. It is just what it is. It's an advanced distribution, which is binary based instead of source based. It has an advanced install, but there are scripts to help with installation, like Arch install. And if you do the Arch way, you really do learn about the Linux kernel using this distribution. Maybe even more with Gentoo, but Gentoo is. What the flip is with Gentoo? Oh, let's actually talk about that. Gentoo is a source based distribution. In other words, unlike the binaries where you can just install them, you have to build every single thing from source, including the kernel. Ugh. Think of this as Arch, but on steroids. There are distros that make it easier, like Calculate Linux. Well, Gentoo is. Anyway, Calculate is a Gentoo based distribution. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, do you use Chrome OS on Chromebooks? You're using something Gentoo based. Did you not know that? Now, you got Google nonsense baked into Gentoo, but you can certainly do shenanigans with it. And if you learn it properly, you can do anything you want with your machine. It takes a lot of skill to learn a source based distribution like Gentoo. You basically need to have a good ability to install Arch the Arch way before you install Gentoo their Arch way, the Gentoo way. It is going to make your brain explode. If you are a beginner to Gentoo, just use Calculate Linux. If you really want that, just use Calculate. But we gotta end this episode here. Goodness gracious. That said, every episode releases every Wednesday afternoon, if there are no scheduling conflicts, at 4 p.m. Pacific time. You can listen to this podcast on Wavelake, YouTube, and any other Podcast 2.0 player, such as Podverse, Fountain, Antenna and many more. You can also copy the RSS feed located in the show notes YouTube side. Paste it onto your Podcast 1.0 player like Spotify, Apple Music, or anything else that doesn't support the Podcast 2.0 search standard. I am, however, out of time for today's episode. Thank you, and good night. How about a blooper? They're gonna be like, I really need to do more bloopers. If I have any weird shenanigans that happen that just give me a good giggle, I'm gonna have to go ahead and do these here.